Hello everyone, welcome to the YouTube channel of Get Set Law by IMS. I'm your verbal ability mentor Sanjana ma'am, and let's discuss some very effective tips through which you can solve passages easily. As is known, passage solving or reading comprehension or passages are very central to the CLAT exam, not just CLAT, ALIT, SLAT and other couple of exams. You will always find reading comprehension passages there. Now what happens if a passage is specifically difficult for you to understand? For the most part, what I've learned is that students will tend to skip those passages and maybe just solve passages which reading it is easy for them. But you need not do that. Just follow these tips. For the most part, you will find some improvement in your scores if you apply these over an extended period. So you can't expect everything to happen radically, right? So just be patient and let's follow the steps here, right? Now the first thing is, learn to understand what the main idea of the passage is. Main idea slash central theme slash central plot slash central thesis slash central argument, right? So what is main idea? Main idea is the actual point or the main topic that the author is trying to emphasize. Now also there's a correct way of finding out the main idea. Do not always think that the main idea is given in the introduction. For the most part, especially if it's a fiction passage, you cannot ascertain the main idea by a mere reading of the introductory statements, right? So how do you understand what a main idea is? According to me, main idea is the idea maximum weightage in the passage, right? Maximum weightage means the idea that will be reverberated throughout the passage, right? How do you identify is you will find keywords that are always leading up to that idea itself. Or the second way to understand the main idea or the main point that the author is trying to discuss is by focusing on the conclusion or the manner in which the passage culminates. If you can combine these two together or choose either of them, whichever is convenient, whichever helps you will be able to understand the main idea. See, if you don't understand the main idea, it's possible that a lot of questions centering on purpose, central argument, you won't be able to answer properly. Let me also tell you something very important here. Essentially, there are three ideas in a passage. One is called the main idea or the central idea. The second one is called a sub-idea, right? A sub-idea, or let's just say, you can also call it a supporting idea, which supports the main idea. It's an idea that leads up to the main idea, but it is not the main idea itself, right? And the last one is called let me write it down here for you. It's called a peripheral idea, which is an idea which even if you remove from the passage, it's not going to impact the passage, right? It's a very peripheral idea like that. Something which is just mentioned, you can choose to not read it as well, for it doesn't create any impact on the passage, right? So sometimes if whosoever is making the question paper, they want to confuse the students, what they're going to do is there will be two options that will be very easy to eliminate, and the last two options then will be so close to each other that the student feels very confused. So how do you choose the better one? You should know when it's a main idea question, you're supposed to choose the main idea, even though the second option can be correct in that it's a supporting idea, but it is not the main idea itself, right? So I felt that this was a concept that you should know, right? So always identify the main idea. That's the first tip you need to keep in mind. Next is always focus on the ifs, the howevers, the buts and the yets. What happens is that these transitional verbs or connectors are there to indicate a contrast of opinion, right? Or to indicate or introduce surprising facts in the passage. When I say, you've scored well, however, you need to do better. In this way, I'm also exhorting the student to do better. Maybe this is not an acceptable score going forward, and therefore I'm imploring the student to perform better in the exam, right? So do you see the usage of the word however to sort of introduce a contrast, to sort of introduce a change in my tone or opinion, right? So always focus on this, right? Very important, these keywords, these connectors here. What happens is the utility is that these shifts often highlight the author's stance or a turning point in the argument. So just because the first couple of lines have a very positive tone to it does not mean that the overall tone might be positive. Maybe going forward, whenever we have a however, the tone might switch, it might change into being a negative tone for that matter. So this is the second point you need to factor in. Third one is always look for keywords. Even if you do not understand the passage, at least focus on the keywords. What are keywords? These are your adjectives. If there is a word livid mentioned, if there is a word called critical mention, if there's a word which is vindictive mention, just focus on the adjectives, especially if you know the meaning of the words. That will be all the more impactful. The adjectives will help you determine the stance of the author's attitude, which is nothing but the tone of the author or the passage, right? How does the author feel towards the topic that he is discussing? Is he supporting it? Is he disapproving it? And all of that. So this is a third step you need to keep in mind. And all of this cumulatively you can use even when you do not understand a particular passage. So let's talk about difficult passages. Now, different genres of passages are asked. For the most part, what I've observed is that students are quite averse to literature, fiction, art passages, maybe because it's not their cup of tea is what they think. It's not the reality. If you start reading them on a regular basis, you will develop some familiarity with it, so much so that it becomes easier for you to grasp the meaning of such passages. Now, for difficult passages, do not skip the passage. See, you don't have to do it, because a lot of times you can simply read the question, focus on what the question is asking, then locate the point asked in the question in the passage. Right? At least mapping of the ideas is possible. You don't understand the passage, that's okay. But at least try and read and just understand the lines or statements that you're able to read. Right? Read only what you understand clearly. So nobody is sort of impressing upon you to read the entire passage. Obviously, if you do not understand, that's okay. But do not skip reading it altogether. Right? You might still be able to answer based on the clear parts. What if a question is made out of the statement that you've understood? So it's possible. And let me tell you, out of every difficult passage, let's just say a difficult passage has 6 questions. It's easy to answer at least 2 questions, right? It can be a question on vocabulary. It can be a question on figure of speech, which according to me is more objective in nature, right? It does not require subjective interpretation also a couple of times. Always focus on the requirement of the question. Yes, always focus on what the question asks, right? And then you can locate the question, especially in case of a specific detailed question. So maybe there's a statement given in the passage and the question asks you to tell the implied meaning of the statement. What you can do is just locate the statement in the passage, read a couple of lines above it, a couple of lines below it, gauge the overall meaning, and then choose the correct option accordingly. Right? And next is, and very fruitful, the tip this is, it's called elimination technique. Now, once you're done understanding the passage, once you're done reading the question, next thing that I'd suggest is, instead of trying to look for the correct option, why don't you start eliminating the wrong options? This way you'll have a smaller pool of options to choose from. Now, what sort of options to eliminate? The most common ones are out of context, something which is far-fetched, something which is not relevant to the passage in hand. The second ones are options that are running contrary to the author's view or idea, opposite the author's view or idea in the passage. And then you also have options that contain quantifiers. The reason I have highlighted this in red is because you need not eliminate those options blindly, right? You need to go back to the passage and cross check if those still apply to the context of the option. So for example, what are quantifiers? These are very specific words that determine the scope of the option already. Only, always, favorite, mostly, absolute, solely, etc. These are some of the quantifiers. Now let me give you an example. If a statement says there is nothing apart from clouds that causes rain, there is nothing apart from clouds that causes rain, the actual meaning means only clouds cause rain. So here you can't say that the statement is wrong because it contains a quantifier. So what I mean to say is, do not blindly eliminate the options. Sometimes go back to the passage. It's possible that the passage actually implies these quantifiers given in the options, right? And then the last tip that I have for you is, between 2 close options, choose the better one. Now, what is a better option? Something which directly addresses the question, something which directly addresses the argument, attacks the argument in cases of strengthening and weakening, right? Or something that is more substantial. Now, for in case of main idea question, right? How do you choose a better option between 2 seemingly close options, right? Look for keywords, right? It's possible that the option that you feel is also correct, it might contain a different keyword, so maybe go back to the passage. I hope it's not a generalization. If it's a generalization, you cancel it out, right? Look for keywords, it will help you. Look for something which is more substantial, which is more direct, more in tandem with the contents of the passage, right? So that's how you do it with the help of these tips. Try and apply them over an extended period. Maybe do this on a daily basis for 1 or 2 passages. Passage solving, if you want it to come in handy, you have to give time to it on a regular basis. Solve 1 to 2 passages daily, right? So I hope you found everything quite helpful. Let me know in the comment section if you want another discussion on this, and for further queries and insights you can connect with us through these platforms. Thank you so much everybody. Have a great day.